Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am super excited because I have Alex Radcliffe on the line. Say hello, Alex.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. And for those who aren't familiar, Alex is founder and owner of Board Game Co., which is a website that's a store. We'll talk about that, but then also a pretty massive YouTube channel, really in the like heading up to the top tier as you pound through subscribers. Where was it last time I checked? 31,000, so significant point 0.5, 31,500. But really, I mean that's a in the board game space, that's really you're getting into the like watch it play the like the range of the top tier there. So what I was hope I'm super curious about all things Alex Radcliffe because we like to talk about the journey and how you got to it. So like to
Sure.
start things off, you know, how did you like when did you start getting into the gaming? Has it been your whole board gaming? Has it been your whole
Oh
life
man.
or more recent? But then rolling into like and then how did you start your the board game store business and how did that come together?
Sure. So I'm gonna just rattle through things as fast as possible. Anything you want me to go in more details on?
Sure,
Meaning I'm just
sure.
gonna because if I take my time and everything, it'll be a while. Just feel free to interrupt or
Hey,
ask
and
questions
you
or
you have long videos.
yeah.
I every time I see one of your videos, I'm like, oh man, they're like my videos. Do I have to? Yeah. Anyway, keep
Yes.
going.
Yeah, no. So the short, there's no short version. The semi-short version is, I'm playing games all my life to a degree, but designer games, the world you and I tend to play these types of games in. I got started in 2011. I generally say 2011. Sometimes I say 2012. It's because I don't remember exactly, but somewhere
Sure,
in that
sure.
range. My brother-in-law came home with Catan. We had played Catan. We had played Carcassonne on our own growing up, and then he came back home with Stone Age or Small World, one of those two. And then a
Both
few months later,
fantastic
he
games.
exactly, and then a few months later he came home with the other. So I don't remember the order, but within a 3 month period, I was exposed to these two games that were, like you said, fantastic games. And I was like, this is two new things. I just thought Catan was the only good board game, and now there's like these other two. And I started Googling, and I very quickly, within like a matter of days, I was down a rabbit hole of there are tons of games out there. Now, having played Small World, I checked out all these Days of Wonders things. I went on Cool Stuff Inc. I went on eBay, and short versions, I made like two or three purchases of just a bunch of games to try out after like just researching on the spot, trying to figure out what's out there. And I got like all the Small World stuff, all this stuff. That led to the hobby starting, the addiction of the hobby of just always being always looking for more games, always being excited, finding
Well,
Board
well,
Game Geek.
back
I
then
don't
you
know.
could almost get them at that time.
Yes,
Like back
yes,
then,
it
being
was.
the master of the board game space was a little bit more of a reasonable conversation.
It was. You know what? That's true. It really was. I think I forget about that, but you're right. It was reasonable to try everything good. Nowadays, it's getting harder and harder to try everything good. But yeah, so I started getting everything, and then from there I started getting more things. And then one day I woke up and I had like 200 games in my collection that I had never played, and I was like, that's a problem. We have like a real problem on our hands. So I stopped buying new games and instead started trading for them on Board Game Geek. When I played a few games, I'd go on Board Game Geek, I'd start trading with other users, and it led to the slow increase in trading that one day, again, I can go into more detail, less detail, but one day I realized I had like a bit of a business on my hands where what I was doing is I was adding more and more games to my collection for trading, and I was starting to trade around just to get games. So I was just cycling games in my collection just to trade, and I was like, "There's no one else who's really doing this except on an individual one-to-one level." And I wanted to create it more as like a business and infrastructure. So I started putting all my games up for trade, whether I played them or not. And then things started flooding in. People started just like coming because I'd have a collection of like 100 plus good games
Right.
available for trade, and people would be like, "Hey, you have a trade request, trade request, trade request," and I just started trading games. And that's the slow start to Board Game Co., where I kind of realized that, oh, this is like not just a, hey, I can get a few extra games to my collection, but there's a real demand for someone who's trading on a large scale. And so at that point in 2014, this is in 2014 this happened, and we moved to what I did is I had a friend who actually is into board games as well, who lived in Cleveland with me, and he had a warehouse in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he and I had a bunch of conversations, and we started moving this to a warehouse, which is when it moved from being a basement business where I packed all the boxes, didn't
Sure.
declare any taxes, didn't have an accountant, and then he started having employees and taxes and accountants and warehouse fees and all these shipping fees left, right, and center, all these real things that became part of a business. And we spent the next 4 years growing that while taking not a single cent out of the business.
Well,
Because
let me
yeah,
interject for a second, just because it's actually an
sure,
important
sure.
moment. I just did an interview with folks from
The top
I want
shelf,
to
top
say,
shelf
yeah,
gamer.
Chad and Marlene or
Yep,
Marlena, if I'm from Top Shelf Gamer, and it's not the same, but similar. It's like board game geek getting
yep,
something, starting to like be frustrated, or in your case, you just had this abundance, but being more proactive with it, and then it tilting into basement or garage or living room business into
yep,
like, well, we need some real space, and transitioning to more of a business, and in line with the growing hobby. I think actually we're going to get to the video stuff, but I'm not 100% sure. Probably not. But the first video of yours where I like really took notice was I think you have the one where you're like, "Am I ready to trade or sell from my collection?" And you were like, "I'm ready to get rid of Skull Hollow." And I was like, "Who is this guy? What's going on here?"
yeah.
And then I was like, "Oh man, this video has a lot of views." Um, but so okay, so you transition,
Yep.
and it's more of a business. And now during this time, do you also have a full-time job, or like does this ever become your full-time job, or has it been a side business the whole time?
It's been a side business the whole time, the entire time. And part of that is, I mean, so I live in Cleveland, a family of six. We have four kids, and
Wow.
life's expensive. It's
Yeah,
not,
for sure.
and Board Game Co, like I said already, when we turned it before as a business, when I was running it out of my basement, it was making like a, I don't remember, it's a long time. It's making like maybe like, $1,000, $2,000 a month, which is decent, but it wasn't a lot of money. And then as soon as we made it into a business, as soon as we started paying employees and warehouse fees and accountants, we had no money. Literally for 4 years, I didn't take a cent out of the business, and that's not, you can't pay the bills with nothing. Unfortunately, I'd
It's
love
true.
to, but you can't.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. So in 2018, we actually, yeah. So going back to the question. So yeah. So I had a full time job the entire time. I've actually had two different jobs along the way. When this first started, I was a purchaser for a food and medical facility that we purchased all the goods they required and all that stuff. And I did that for a few years. In 2014, roughly when I transitioned it from being a side business to being a real business, was also when I transitioned jobs, and which to what I'm doing nowadays, which I work for an e-commerce company. We build websites for, well, companies that want websites to sell stuff. And so I've had that the entire time. And then going back to the business side of things, in 2018, I told my partner that we have to stop doing this at the end of the year if things don't turn around. And that's because, again, nothing is not a lot of money.
Well, and you're
And
you're paying your time and effort and focus, right? It's becoming
yes,
a real
yeah. And I
thing.
mean, I got free board games out of it. It was nice. It was like 4 years of board games that I could take from the warehouse, but no paycheck.
Right.
And that's, again, not a lot. You can't pay the bills with board games. So what we did is in 2018, when he and I agreed, we, again, it's a long time with no return, and we sat there and decided to do a few things before we closed up shop as a result, including a new website, diving down the marketing rabbit hole, a whole bunch of things we had never really done. And they fortunately were enough to start actually taking money out of the business. Not a lot at first. It was $500 a month for a few months, which was a ton for me because I was like, I'm actually taking a paycheck out of this. This is so
Sure, sure.
satisfying.
Right, right.
Yeah, and it grew. And 2019 was good. 2020 was, the COVID and pandemic and all these things, and that was a challenge. There was a point when we were running the entire operation on one person because in order to comply with local restrictions, we
Sure.
couldn't have more than one person in the warehouse. So yeah, it was definitely a nightmare and a mess, but it's always been a nightmare and a mess, but it has been a growing nightmare and a mess. So like we're at the point now where we have like 5 employees, myself and my partner as well on top of that, and but at the same time, still not a ton of money in it. In fact, one thing that we didn't really get into is like we're potentially looking at closing it up. Not 100% certain, but potentially looking at closing shop because it's been really great, but even now it's still paying myself like less than minimum wage to get everything done, basically.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I think if oftentimes creators and people starting business and entrepreneurs who are like to divide their
Yeah.
revenue by their hours, they find out they're making very little money.
Yeah.
Well, but so here's what I want to understand. All right, so okay, and certainly, I haven't used Board Game Co, but I do know that it has been active and a
Mhm.
big part of the trading scene, right? So it'll be interesting to see what kind of vacuum it creates and how it sort of, what ends up happening, especially
Yeah.
since, I mean, I think I'm sure a lot of the trading crowd is very used to engaging on whether it's BGG or Facebook, but it can be a little bit challenging to navigate some of those forms the few times that I've gone to try and
Yep.
do it. There's a lot of rules and requirements, and you just got to get it right. But so I was looking, and you didn't, assuming this is correct, you started or you dove into the YouTube stuff December 11th, 2019. Whether or not it's
That's dead on.
exactly, yeah, well,
I
I'm
think it's
looking at
December
it.
8th. I think so. Which video are you looking at? Because I think December 8th
I'm
was my
looking
first
at
video.
your about page that gives the stats, and it says
Oh, interesting.
join December 11th, 2019. It also says you have almost 6 million views. But setting that aside, um, so that's not that long ago for the size of your channel. I mean, that's
Yeah,
pretty new. And so you do the marketing, and so was there a point where you're like, hey, we should do some YouTube stuff? Were you bored? Like how?
basically.
Like let's talk about that piece.
So YouTube started, and this is why, like, even if we do shut down Board and Co. And by the way, one of the things we are looking at is potentially having someone else do it, like sell it off instead, because I am worried it will create a small void. But either way, going back to YouTube, is part of the ever-growing efforts to make Board Game Co. go from struggling small side job to being a little more involved trying to dive down different marketing rabbit holes. And so for a few months in, I want to say the beginning of 2019, I started doing Instagram. And I did that for like 6 months and tried to like just like a little post over here, take a picture of a game, have a little tag, Board Game Co., occasionally tag a product. And it was fun, but I got, a few hundred people who are following the page. I don't know if I ever got a single sale from it. It was just like, okay, great. I'm just finished playing a game tonight. I'll take a picture and post it and see how it goes. But my heart was never really into it. And then in late 2019, one day I picked up a camera and I was like, I'm going to try YouTube now. Let's try that instead. And I really started enjoying it very quickly. The ability to talk about the hobby that I love and to have different conversations. I'm not really cinematic in the sense that I can compose a nice shot on Instagram. You see tons of channels that have amazing photos. And for
Sure.
me, it's always a struggle to get one that was halfway decent. But YouTube, I enjoyed talking. And for a while, it was, the typical arc you'd see in a YouTube channel of, 5 subscribers, 10 subscribers, 40 subscribers. And then at one point, by accident, straight up by accident, it's not even a question, I just started talking about Kickstarters and talking about them from the stance of why I would or would not back a Kickstarter. Talking about the
Right.
value side of, oh, I'm going to back this one because even if it's not a game for me, I can turn around and sell it on the secondhand market. It will hold this value. Like, this is the place to get this game. And I was just talking about how I back Kickstarters. I wasn't trying to do anything innovative. I was just talking about my thought process. Being in the used board game space for 8 years or 9 years now, does put me in a certain mind frame as to the way I look at the economy of board games. And that's when people started resonating and being attracted to the channel very quickly, because I think at the time, very few, if any, channels really talked about the value aspect of a Kickstarter. I know plenty of channels talked about Kickstarter in general, but very few were like, oh, this will be cheaper at retail, this won't be cheaper at retail, oh, this is a
Yeah,
game that people will want. Yeah.
for sure. I think it the I sometimes use the word punditry, but the like looking at it from the perspective of more of a product critical eye as opposed to a whether the game is good, right? More of that
Yeah.
side of it. I think um, given when you started doing it is pretty early for when that was starting to come online in sort of in the YouTube fashion, because a lot of the review channels don't do it, right? That there isn't, honestly, there isn't still today, there aren't that many channels where people talk about industry news and Kickstarters from the perspective of reporting or ingesting or sort of, again, third party, um, compared to almost any other industry, right? And
Yeah.
it's really interesting that almost all the content, the dramatically large amount of the content is really focused on,
The
reviews or
games.
previews or
Yeah.
playthroughs in the games, right? But it's a little bit different, and it's always been surprising. But so you fall into that channel, and actually while you were doing that, I was scrolling through every video you've ever done,
Mhm.
and so your Hello World is that first video, right?
Yes.
Um, and honestly, interestingly enough, I had seen, your latest videos have a very consistent look and feel, um,
Yeah.
with your bannering and your color scheme, and it's like very bold and frankly well done, and it speaks to your channel. But actually, looking back at all your original stuff, it wasn't as fancy, but you were like rotating. You're like every video I do, I'm gonna cycle my colors from
I'm consistent.
blue, yellow, white,
Yeah.
blue, orange, white rather. But yeah, no, I mean you've definitely had a key look that evolved into what you have today as you went along. But it has good branding as you've gone through it. So okay, so let's talk about that. So you have
Well,
this.
so that's actually an interesting part because one of the things I did, and I don't know if this is, I don't know necessarily why I did this, but I did the first 2 or 3 videos, and then I started going online and just reading how to start a YouTube channel. And I read like, and I talked about some like in some of the videos where I talked about becoming a content creator, different things, but I read through hundreds of pages of things to do on YouTube to try to do well because I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to try to do it as much as I possibly can. And like one of the things that's like huge is talks about branding, thumbnails, talks about, audience retention. It talks about I don't even know what they're the different things, but like I try to read as many guides as possible. So that's why even from some of my first thumbnails, I was going with something bold, visual that stuck out because I tried reading as much as I possibly could before doing this or after doing this.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
well, I think you nailed it from the get-go. And again, talking, I mean, about lots of channels, few channels um, get that right as quickly, right? Like a lot of folks come in through the content, then over time it evolves and improves, and they like start figuring out how to do it. But looking through, scrolling through your video down to the first one, you can see it was something you were doing from the get-go. Also, you're front and center in a lot of these and the branding, and also the consistency, right? You pretty much from the get-go, you have a pretty solid set of like, you've got a handful of videos that you're figuring things out, but then you hit a stride and you're really
Yeah.
pretty consistent about your delivery here. So at this point, I guess one of the questions is, okay, so you still have your full-time job, right? And
Yes.
you still maybe you're rolling, you're closing up, you're figuring that out for your board game co stuff. But I mean, what kind of amount of time are we talking about these days, right? Like I know what I do for my channel, and I know all the
Yeah.
reasons my channel's small, but it's at like the lowest rung of my life compared to all my
Mhm.
other responsibilities. But
Yeah.
um, but it's still a ton of effort. So what for you, like what amount of your day and time on just a general basis goes into the video or the editing or the
Sure.
thumbnails or all that stuff?
So like I messaged you like right before we started talking. I was like, oh, I'm in the middle of editing a video now. It's what's it called? I would say it's Sundays. It's basically most of my day. Past family outings or things we do together. Most of my day Sundays where I get prepped for the whole week, trying to cover all the reviews I'm going to do, the things that aren't time sensitive content that I can get prepped. And then past that, it's usually I would say I'll get a little bit of editing done in the morning, and I usually film videos late at night. Frequently I'll be commenting, and now it's like 11 o'clock at night or 12 o'clock at night when I do a video. And for right now, it's still that balance of just trying to find every second of free time while I juggle 3 different jobs. One of them, which I'm hoping to offsource. Long term, hopefully, I'd love to leave my day job as well. I love doing these videos. I love content creation. I love the space that we're in. And it's hard to get to I mean, just practically speaking, with pay wise, it's hard to get to a full time revenue. But I'm happy to take my time doing so because I love it. Running a board game store was it was being adjacent to my passion, but
Sure, sure.
talking about board games is my passion, because I really like games.
Well,
But yeah, as far as
clearly.
yeah, as far as time commitment, the time commitment it's not small. Some of the different videos that do differently in terms of whatever. There's a reason I don't do B-roll in any of my videos because the amount of time it takes to add B-roll is a
Oh
whole
man,
another
I
step.
don't I don't think people get it. I
Yeah,
can't. I'm I made that decision from the get-go, which was just like I'm just not going to do. I've done it for Kickstarter videos, and like I can do it.
yeah.
It blows up your time.
It
It is
doubles the time in a
crazy.
video, doubles it. It's easily.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I even when I first, if you watch like my first couple Q&As, I actually used to do the thing, and I
mhm,
don't use Premiere. In Premiere, it's a lot easier, but like in iMovie and other programs, where like if you're talking, I'm gonna like go full screen with you, and then if I'm talking, I was doing the thing like listening to the conversation, and even that was
yeah,
like, especially when you get into a 30 or 45-minute call, you're like, oh, forget it.
yeah.
Um, but
It's a
it is
lot.
something like, have you considered like one of the things, because there have been times on and off where I've like thought about the content creation a little bit more seriously, and then I back off and I do other things, but bigger creators outside of board games, a lot of them don't. There are a lot of services and groups that are editors and individuals, not like film editors, where you partner with the person or the service and you send them your raw footage and they go through and like they know the space and you have to pay them. Um,
Yeah.
but you basically delegate out that part of the work. Is that something you've ever looked into or considered, or?
So I've definitely considered it. And if, if the channel ever gets large enough that it's worth it, I'm down for the concept. The problem is, practically speaking, the time it takes to edit a video and outsource it to somebody else versus the revenue a video gets,
Sure.
it's hard to justify it. It's something that, again, like one of the things, like when I question myself, like, okay, great, let's say I do quit my day job one day, what am I doing with that time? Well, first of all, playing more board games, obviously, but then secondly is things like b-roll, things like improving the quality of the content in a way that adds more to because I mean, I like b-roll. B-roll is nice. If you're having a top 10 list, you're talking about games, seeing those games as you go through it, that'd
Oh,
be awesome.
it's awesome
But
content, right?
yeah, but paying somebody for it doesn't make sense unless the video's making, 50 to $100, which most don't. Most videos make, depending on the size of the channel, the views, whatever it is. But if I get $20 from a video, that's a good video already.
Right,
So
right.
it's paying somebody for that time. It's just, I don't know what the math is. I don't know who you can outsource to. I've considered it. I haven't looked into it, but hey, if we get large enough one day, sure.
It's an interesting something that uh, so there are there are some prices, there are some ones that are cheaper than you'd expect that are pretty good quality that involve you just like drop it off in a folder on Dropbox and then pick it up in the morning. But one of the things that I found is interesting, just speaking for myself with Pencil First Games, is so going from that place where you're like, I don't take any money out of the business. Um,
Sure.
like you were saying earlier, I don't really take any money out of Pencil First Games, and I'm also full time employed in another job. But one of the interesting things I've found myself doing more as of late, as of this last year, somewhat because I have somebody who's really good now with Jessica, is like I find myself the taking out is paying Jessica to do something that I would normally do at the expense of margin, saying,
Yeah.
"Hey, company's not going to make as much money, but I get 5 hours of my life back this week." Um, so and like so and then I keep Jessica busy, but like the I have found that using some of the money, that some of the surplus money coming from one thing or another, to have somebody do something that is just like I'm fully capable of it. I could do it, or I could watch another Netflix, video, see
So,
something new,
yeah.
or watch What If, Marvel What If or whatever with my wife, is like that's worth that I that my hourly, my normal amount I get paid is like, like, so there's an interesting equation where it's a balance between profit, but then also like what does the time cost you as an individual, and whether or not it's worth offsetting some profit to just get some of your life back.
Yeah, no, I
But
completely agree with the thought process. The question, like, for instance, I've gone through this thought process of if or when I quote unquote quit my day job, is there a way to go to part time instead and use that time to subsidize this kind of conversation? Paying for
right,
somebody to edit a video. So the thought process and experiment, I'm 100% behind. The practical question is whether I can make all the math work. That's something that will take time. I'm not in a rush. But it's a question of whether I can have a part time day job or not. It
yeah,
doesn't have to be
sure,
all
sure,
or nothing. All these things are very interesting questions, but yeah, it's the same, and it applies to any conversation in life. If you're going to mow your lawn versus pay someone else to mow your lawn, if you're going to edit a
yeah,
video
yeah,
versus pay somebody else, it's
right,
always a
right.
question of where's your time best spent on a personal, financial, everything level.
Sure, totally. All right, let me. I'm going to pivot to a different question. So one of the things in your channel is, I think, and it's probably more of the videos I tend to watch because unfortunately, I just don't watch a lot of uh, board game reviews or unboxing anymore. Either I can find time to play the game or not. Um, but some of the content you do create that I find interesting is you've done a number of, it's a lot of it stems out of the Kickstarter sort of commentary, I think, though some of them have sort of not really been specific to Kickstarter, but have done a lot of content that, is aggressive isn't the right word, but like sort of tear down or critical of other products or companies, not really individuals, but maybe the game on this
Sure.
Kickstarter is just that individual basically because they're the only person that worked on it, so they feel like it's them. Um, how have you, has that, have you gotten much or any blowback on it, or sort of confrontation, but not aggressive, but like from
Sure.
creators? Like how have you rolled with that sort of, some of
Great
that more
question.
pointed content?
So it's a very interesting question, and I've definitely evolved myself as I've had these types of. Well, let me give an example. So I'll give you a few ways to take this. The first is going to be one of the things you mentioned with going to Skull Hollow is I have a monthly segment that I've been doing since the beginning of the channel of games leaving my collection, and more often than not, they're not bad games. It's just there's a lot of games. I always rotate, and I'm always trying to find the games that are most suited to my taste, and I try to make that point as clearly as possible. Once in a while, there are games that I really don't enjoy. And there was a particular game by Johnny Packhampton, who this before I knew him personally, but I said like I didn't like this game. I was like I did not enjoy it. I did not have fun. I was fairly aggressive in my feedback of how much I didn't enjoy the game.
And he's a strong-willed dude. I know him as
And
well.
he messaged me like he was trading games with me on Board Game Geek later, and apparently he'd been trading games with me all along. I just never put a face to the name. It
Sure,
was just
sure.
a game. There was no
Which
designer
happens,
behind
right?
it. It was a game, and he commented like, "Oh, sorry, Sierra West wasn't for you." And I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Like I felt mortified because it was the first time I really connected that there's a person behind this game that I didn't like. Obviously, I know it. Obviously, it's true. But there's a person behind this game that I don't like that is going to
And there's a
take that.
jet behind me right now. But anyway, keep
Yeah.
going.
And it really affected the way I criticize things always going forward. That moment really affected and changed the way I criticized. And in the sense that I'm still willing to be critical, but I have to remember there's a person behind it. I have to be more careful of my words, still giving my opinion. If I'm reviewing games, it's my opinion. But there's a way to give your opinion that is less hurtful, less cheering, less aggressive, and more focused on facts. What did I not like? Why did I not like? What are the things that are good about this game? Like I used to casually say, "Oh, I hate this game. I did not enjoy myself." Now I'll say, "This did this, and this really well, and I didn't like it because of X, Y, and Z." It's not about hiding things. It's about being more measured with what you're saying. Another example or incident would be towards the beginning. One of the first times I had to do a review is I played a game with TTS on a creator. Well, I played a game with a creator on TTS, and again, I really didn't like it. And at this point, I was more sensitive to the fact that there were people behind it. And I remember going to my wife. This is when the channel was really starting to grow in the beginning. And I went to my wife and I was like, I don't know if I ever want to review games again. Like, I don't want to go on my channel and tear this thing down in any way. Like, there's a person behind it. And I managed to work through it and be fine and be measured without being whatever. But it does, the knowledge that there are people behind these products is 100% there. And that knowledge extends to everything I do and say. And it's a balance that I will never get right, but will always try to get right. If you weigh your words too carefully, if you're too nice to the concept of the person behind it, you're doing your audience a disservice. If you are too aggressive and casual with this rule book is terrible, this Kickstarter, you should never back that project, then you're doing the creator disservice. You owe fairness to
Yeah,
everyone. How do
yeah.
you
I
balance
mean,
that?
it's an interesting. I tend to, I half agree and I half disagree in the context. I mean, and I have some
Mm-hmm.
as a person who's also a creator and does a lot of stuff, or both video creation, but board game stuff. Um, I do have sensitivity to that piece of it, but at the same time, I sort of also find myself sometimes it's like, that's what I would say as a player, man or woman or whomever, right? Like at some
Yeah.
point, like you got to understand that some people just don't like your games and or something you do, and like you can still react that way, but I do feel that I sometimes go out of my way to be like, yes, I know that somebody worked behind this and they worked hard and blah blah blah, but at some point you're like, I don't like it. So
Yeah.
it is a weird balance for sure. Um, I don't know. Do you do any paid previews or content marketing or anything like that? Or are you all
Not currently. Currently, I'm
macro?
still trying to take an approach of not taking money from publishers. I hope to maintain that as long as I can. If one day I pivot and change, I'll do so. But it's one of those balances of the audiences. Sometimes audiences don't know or care. Sometimes they do. So I'm trying to not as long as I can.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's there. There's lots of different perspectives on that, but I ask
Yep.
because as somebody who still does um, Kickstarter previews, unpaid Kickstarter previews, right?
Mhm.
Like I tend to, if there's something that bothers me about the game, I'll still mention it in the preview, right? And that actually, in some ways, I've done that enough with, there are Kickstarter creators of larger size that I used to do videos for, but I no longer get that preview copy anymore.
I, I've told creators, and I don't think they believe me, and I think they're always sensitive to it, and it is what it is. If you do a glowingly positive review versus a mostly positive review while touching upon the negatives, I think it holds more weight. I think it's doing you a service to be willing to be critical about the small stuff. Now, granted, if the small stuff is this game is terrible, don't get it, that doesn't really help. But if the small stuff is like, I wasn't a fan of the action selection mechanism of the game, I feel that could be a little more streamlined, but this and this were great. I think it's a more of a real opinion.
I agree with you. I think one thing that happens, speaking on behalf of Kickstarter creators, is oftentimes those either uncover something you didn't necessarily want to make known or visible, but also can often become weaponized against you in commentary, and not necessarily in a bad way, but if you let me think of a decent example. Like, what's an example that came up with on Hero's Welcome? I think Rodney, not Rodney Smith, the other one. What's his name?
Matt, Rolling
No,
Solo,
Richard Ham.
Rado.
What's his Rado? Um, he he was like, it's great, but I think the two-player game didn't, I wasn't, he's very sensitive to how whether two-player games are interesting, and he felt like,
Yeah.
why didn't you do this? You didn't do this. You didn't do this. And so you get, for people who care about that mode and care about him as a creator, which and he's a very large channel, at least at the time. You then they're like, well, what are you going to do about it? Like, how are you going to address his feedback? Because, that's really important to us. And so you sort of can find yourself into a scramble, especially if you're a newer creator. Over time, you get used to it. But where you're like pivoting and reacting to that kind of feedback, or, like if with Flamecraft Monster Campaign, right? I'm not a fan of the rollout map, and
Oh yeah, it was bad.
I I was
Yeah.
fairly particular about that. And so like it does create some strain on the creators when they have to deal with it. Like as a you as a channel are validating a concern or a thought or a feeling that somebody has, and your validation becomes the reason or the way that which they comment or generate energy around the concern. So I do think there's a little bit of that, but it's an interesting dynamic for sure. Um, but so there, you had the example here with the game you didn't like. How about
Yeah.
on the context of, because you've also like, what was a couple ones like,
Talking about like
what
get
was
this game at retail or not, that kind of conversation.
no, well there was no, the ones I'm trying to think of, well, okay, give me a second, I'll remember.
There
James
was Dead
Hudson.
Reckoning. There
No,
was
what the James Hudson's one, the game Blood Diamond,
Bloodborne.
Bloodborne,
Bloodborne.
right?
Yep.
Like I think you did
Bloodstone.
a
Bloodstone. Bloodstone.
Bloodstone. Did a that was the $300,000 campaign they canceled or whatever it
Yep.
was, right? And you did a pretty long cut down on that, and you spend 5 minutes explaining how it's not a cut down before getting into like some of the concerns. Like it's
Sounds like me.
yeah, yeah.
No, but
But
that one I
so
was defending him. I was defending the cancellation. I was
that's right,
all
you were.
for it.
I think that
Both.
okay. You
Yeah.
you were you
Both.
were that one you were defending it, but you were defending
Uh,
it, but you laid out all the criticism of you were like countering the criticism, but you did
yes.
really bring it all to the forefront. I guess to some degree, when you have videos like that, I mean, as your channel went, okay, maybe a better way to say this, your channel went from small channel,
Yep.
even though you started up, you had a pretty good clip out of the gate. But as you hit your threshold now, you're not what is it, not tastemaker, but like I mean, you might be, but like you're like
No,
a
to
mover
an
and a
extent,
shaker.
I
You're
have
you're an
enough of an audience. So
influencer,
if I
right?
say something, it can matter. I'm aware of that.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
so, do you know what point did that become clear to you? Like
So
when
I
when
think the
did you
point.
notice it?
I have an exact answer for you. An exact answer. This is a video where I was way too critical. Although I think fairly, I just again balance. Uh,
Right.
Dead Reckoning was a campaign from AEG that I put out a video because they had a campaign that started off like the day one. They're like, we're gonna have daily reveals and this, and here's the pledge level, and here's all this stuff. And then across the course of the campaign, the daily reveals were like things like, "Ooh, we're gonna have a YouTube party today, and we're gonna have this one card added to the game." Like the first daily reveal, the first one out of the gate was a large daily reveal. There's like 7 extra things added to your game, and then for the next 2 weeks, they were all like one card or here's an optional buy that we're revealing today. Like you have an option to buy something as a daily reveal. It was like I think it was. In my opinion, it was poorly managed, and they set expectations poorly in a way that had myself as a backer and others frustrated with the pledge levels and the way the campaign was run. and I put out a video. I can't remember what it's
And
titled.
is this the Dead Reckoning? Why the outrage?
That's the one. Thank you. That's the title. Dead Reckoning, Why the
I'm
Outrage.
working here while you're talking. I'm working. So you keep going.
And I remember that that became my fastest growing video as soon as I put it out. And it was a critical video. And I stand behind the things I said, but I was like, this was supposed to be a critical video that 1,000 people watched, and it became a critical video that like 15,000 people watched. And I was like, this was not what I expected. It was, again, I stand by what I said, but like it was the first time that I was like, this was larger. This is a larger criticism than I meant it to be. This is the equivalent of saying, I don't like this food, but everyone in the cafeteria is quiet at the moment you said it. The statement's still true, but a lot more people heard it than you thought were going to.
Sure,
And
sure.
that was definitely, I think, the moment when I realized that I can have an effect by saying something.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's super interesting. I don't have many uh, in the same scale, but there was one where the Dice Tower did a video that was like 10 things designers need to stop doing, or like the
Oh
10
boy.
things we hate about designers, or something like that. Um, and I like at the time I was listening to a lot of the Dice Tower for one reason or another, but I sat down and I was like, I just was like, this doesn't seem right to me. And so like I wrote down like what each it was like all three of them gave their top 10, whatever. And I like wrote down everything they said on a piece of paper, and then I did a video which was like, I want to talk about what these guys are saying. And I like went through bullet by bullet. I wasn't the only person that did this, but I don't know, maybe I was a little bit more rational overall,
Sure.
or articulate about it. I'm not sure, but basically, it was one of those videos where it was like the trajectory just didn't match any of the other ones, in both in terms of like tags and shares and stuff like that. And it sort of culminated. I remember, um, it was like near to Origins or Gen Con or one. It was like somewhat close to the event, and like I was at the event, and Tom
Oh boy.
like tapped me, and he was like, hey, and he like, he's like, I thought what you said in this, but but it was really, I was like, and he's a huge dude, if you didn't know, like he's
Yeah,
really
I
tall.
know. I know.
But it was like one of those times where, and what everyone anyway thinks, but he's effectively a rock star, right? Like, he's like
Yes.
at a very different tier. And it was just one of those interesting things. It was like, oh, you saw the video. I
I
see.
wasn't planning on that.
Yeah, right. That
Yes.
wasn't exactly where I was. But it was a fine chat. But okay, so that's sort of, you've been doing those videos, and now you're continuing along. The channel's growing. You're like trying to balance it out. Do you feel like from a content and a pro, like, do you feel like what you're making now you see as um, the totality of what you're hoping to do, or there are types of content or videos that you're looking to produce and make, and you just haven't gotten to yet? Like, do you feel like you're this is the entirety of the space that you want to be in? Or are there areas of videos that you'd like to do more of or engage with?
So there's a lot of things I theoretically want to do. It's always a balance of making time.
Sure.
Like for instance, one thing that I've tried doing is, I love interviews. I love like what we're doing right now, the talking to people in the space. I love that, and why not do that on camera as well, so people can be a part of the conversation, to quote Rodney or whatever. But it's I like doing interviews in theory, but then the balancing of the time of it. Plus, they do tend to actually be one of the lower watched videos that I've done when the few times I've done them, and so it's one of those things where I want to do more of that. Let's say that's a good example. Past that, I don't think that I ever want to become quote unquote stale. I don't want to do the exact same things. I want to have more video ideas, more video approaches, whether and how I handle reviews and where they show up on my channel. I don't have firm answers. I do feel that to a certain extent I've hit a stride, and a stride comes along with pros and cons. There's the fact that I don't have to think through what videos I'm doing this week because I have a general schedule. But then also people might tune out a bit because it's now the same old thing. The first time I watched a Dice Tower crowdfunding video, I watched the next five of them. Now I watch them every fourth week. There's like a balance of new and
Sure.
interesting can give people a reason to watch. Stable is consistent and gives people a reason to tune in, but can also make it so that it's easy to miss at the same time. So I don't have a lot of firm answers there, but I know that I don't ever want to be just the same old forever.
Got it. Cool, man. Well, we've been on for about 40. These, as you noted, they're not the most watched videos, but I find it interesting, so it works for me. This is just an excuse to get to talk to you. And so, um, as your video, your content's the content you put out. day over day, right, on your
Yeah.
channel. Um, so I guess sort of looking forward. All right, here's one. Is there what's something in the next 3 or 4 months you're excited to see, whether on Kickstarter or retail? Like what's something you're
Ooh.
excited for in the near future?
Slay the Spire on Kickstarter. I want to see that.
That's the big, yeah.
Yeah, that's I mean, I had a chance to play it online. It's a video game that I really like. It's a video game that it's Kickstarter I imagine will do well. I can't wait to see that one pop up. For retail, I should be able to have an answer for you because I'm literally composing my like top 10 games for SM, but I'm trying to remember what's actually on that list, and I can't currently. I can't remember what's on
Well,
it at all.
don't spoil it.
Completely
Don't
blanking.
worry. We'll
Yeah.
we'll, we'll check out the. Actually, somebody did an Essen. Speaking of Skull Hollow, somebody did an Essen uh, podcast recently, and they mentioned Skull Hollow, and I was like, that's not an Essen. Like, I don't know why you guys are talking about. I mean, I don't mind. Do it all you
Yeah.
want, but I thought that was interesting.
Speaking of Skull Hollow, what do you actually have any plans for that gigantic miniature I've seen you playing with on Facebook?
Oh, behind me. Yes and no. Oh, it's up there. Ugh. I have all different sizes of these guys. This is one of those places where um, the answer to your question is like sort of no, but yes, which is like, I haven't been a company or an individual company that's done a lot of, miniatures in the games. And Skull Call
Sure.
was very intentionally not originally. But I was talking about it and we're working on some other Skull Hollow stuff, and I really wanted to understand it, right? And so to go through the process of, it's one thing to know what the manufacturing cost is and the process, and like, see if I can get James to hang out with me and like give me like the 15 times he's done it. But I can work with the different partners that do it, produce it. But then there's also like, what's the effort to actually design it? I mean, I do lots of 3D and video game stuff, but like, what is the considerations on the sculpt and what people are available, and so for me, I wanted to do like a proof of concept of what it would take to make one of these, and I made the Grack and the
Yeah.
and a Fox and Archer, but then there's like, well, what's the avenue to make this something that people like? Is it its own campaign? Is it like Skull Hollow is super cool, but it's not like the biggest game on the planet, right? It's not like
It's
if
Skull Hollow reprint and miniature campaign. A separate box set of
yeah,
miniatures, a reprint of the campaign, a few Facebook ads sporadically spread out showing that miniature, and it's a very cool miniature. I like
it
my
is.
miniatures, and that's a very good miniature.
Yeah,
It builds slow excitement, get a whole new wave of people into the game.
it is true. I sort of feel like where I'm landing on it is, I think, so we have Mall Peak, which is
Hmm.
our next Kickstarter, which is the standalone sequel with 4 new Guardians and all that stuff. Um, I feel like there's going to be an inflection point, like you were talking about, where I'm like, Skull Hollow has like landed. Where I'm like, actually now I feel like there's enough of a base that if I came out with them, it wouldn't be that 1% which equals one person. It would be one
Yeah.
percent that equals a hundred people. And so I really dig it. I didn't think I would dig it as much as I do, but they're super cool. But then it's also like I want a huge one, right? Like, so like what's the right size? Um, and then like you'd want to play with them, but you need, so there's a lot to think out. But like mostly I've just been teasing. Like this isn't like ready to go, but it's part of the process for me to be like, oh, this is cool. And it also means like, oh, hey, I was thinking of we have a game in development called, it's a code name, Time Empire, um, and it has different time machines. And I've been thinking about how to do it, and I had sort of put doing it in 3D off the table and just making a cardboard cutout or whatever. And now I'm like, oh no, maybe I could do it that way. Um, anyway, but it's pretty cool. Like I'm
It's a
pretty
cool
happy
miniature.
with
I'm just
it.
saying,
Yeah,
I played the game, I saw the miniature, I thought it was fantastic. There's got to be what 10, 15,000 copies of Skull Hollow, if not more, out there. There's an audience for there's going to be an audience for that miniature. You've seen it if you pay attention to Kickstarter. There's like standee pledge 27 backers, miniature pledge 472 backers. So
yeah. Maybe I just have to. I have to bite the bullet and just say, if you build it, they will come.
yeah.
Um, but
See, the
I'm
problem
already
is I
doing.
see this. You're saying all the things I am hoping, Alex, but then I'm gonna do it and I'm gonna be let down.
Well, it's not.
Yeah.
It's really expensive. It's not. It's not.
Yes.
It's not. It's not as. It's not. There's not as easy of like, like sometimes on a Kickstarter you're like, even if I just tap the number, I
Here's
can
what we do.
make it. But
Here's what we do. We do is we go up to James Hudson and we offer these. They're gonna be crossover bosses for Bloodstone. So now people definitely want to get them.
See, well,
Yeah.
there you have it. Maybe there is a solution like that. We'll have to make that happen. But anyway, we are off on this side. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on, and for sure, like I think the range of the content you've been producing is fantastic. And while I appreciate long-winded, detailed conversation, so
Yeah.
I like that your videos are 45 minutes long. I appreciate it. Don't feel the need to cut it down to 1 minute bits. I think it's nice to have the conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I watched. You mentioned the Top Shelf Gamer one recently. I watched that whole thing. It appealed to me from the sake of that journey that we talked about earlier. The starting from a basement, going to a business. I've been watching that whole thing. I watched. Yeah, I'm with you on appreciating them.
Awesome. All right. Thanks a
Yep.
lot. Bye.
Thanks.
Hey everybody, Edo here, and thanks for watching Gaming with Edo. Reviews over here on this playlist, League and Insider videos over here on this one. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, play some great games. Thanks.